Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you're joining. Welcome to today's education session focused on how you can start leveraging the latest in natural language query and processing technologies with your JDE data. So we'll be exploring some benefits and trends with these technologies and also some examples of how it can be applied to JD Edwards analysis. So before we jump in, a few housekeeping items to review. We will have time for Q&A at the end of today's session, but the chat is disabled, so please enter your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom panel. And we'll be monitoring throughout the session, and then also we'll make the recording available to you. So if you want to share it with coworkers or review it later, you'll be able to do that. So just to introduce the team that we have today, my name is David Kettinger, and I am leading the marketing team here at Preferred Strategies. And today I have the privilege of introducing Todd Wilson, who's the CEO of Preferred Strategies. And over the years, Todd's held many roles in IT, including CIO roles at Cliff Bar and Kids too. But when he's not out flying planes or skiing or spending time with his family, you can usually find him exploring the latest tech. So I'm excited to have him here to discuss natural language query technologies today. Just to get us started though, while people still join, I see we still have some people coming in. I'm going to launch a couple polls here. So the first one we have is around if you are currently using, how familiar you are with natural language query. So think Alexa and Siri, those types of natural language processing technologies that you can just speak in normal language and have people or have computers return the results to you in spoken language or natural language. So it looks like we have a couple people that are familiar with the topic, but maybe not any experts yet. So that's great. And then the second question we had was what analytics platform you are currently using. So the choices we have are Power BI, Tableau, Qlik, Oracle, or other. And it looks like we have pretty much responses from all over the spectrum there. So thank you for that info. Let me go ahead and just end the poll, and then I'll share these back with you so you guys can see. Again, it looks like we had a majority of people that are either just getting started or just hearing about it, or maybe they've explored it, but don't have too many experts on the call. And then it looks like we have most people that are either using Power BI, Oracle, or some other analytics platform. Cool. All right. So let me go ahead and stop sharing that. And we'll move on just to introduce the data set that we'll be working with today, which is going to be the QuickLaunch for JD Edwards data set. So at Preferred Strategies, we've developed this QuickLaunch enterprise analytics platform for companies who've realized they needed to replace their legacy reporting tools and move to a modern analytics platform. And so that's what we'll be using in demonstration today as our data set. And what we found is that enterprise platforms help offer an automated, secured, and centralized single source of truth for data. And it really serves as this blueprint for advancing your data-driven journey, including perhaps exploration into natural language query. So thanks for joining us today. With that, I'll pass it over to Todd.
Okay, thanks very much, David, and thanks everyone who's joined. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully this will be informative for you. We certainly enjoy sharing out technologies that sometimes are new, sometimes are experimental, and will be part of the future. In this case, natural language query is something that has been around for a period of time. The Q&A functionality, for example, within Power BI has been around for a while, but it does continue to mature it does continue to change over time, and we'll talk about some of the ways that that's happening and has happened. So the agenda today, we'll cover a series of topics. We'll start with what is natural language query, and talk a little more in detail about that. And especially these days when you hear a lot about generative AI, how does that compare? But also why it matters. Why should we be thinking about natural language query and how it might fit in our data-driven journey across our organizations. We'll touch on how natural language query and the broader topic of natural language processing fits together and what that landscape looks like now. It also is, I think, useful to think about how does that apply to my business? What are the use cases that that will resonate and bring the most value to our organization as we consider this technology? And then, of course, what are the benefits? If we look at those use cases, how can we benefit? How can we really get the most value out of that? It's also important to look at the challenges and what that might mean and what we might need to consider to head down that path of leveraging NLQ and related technologies. It's something that has been established over time. No doubt you use some form of that already, whether it's Siri or Alexa or Ask Google. Probably your automobile has the ability to recognize voice and translate using a slice of NLQ to be able to translate those commands. So, but what are the challenges? What are the considerations that we should keep in mind? Also, what are the tools and other related technologies out there, and how do we understand them better to make the right kind of decisions as we're experimenting and even trying to add that to our data strategy across our organizations. We'll also spend a few minutes going through a live demo. It will be, as David mentioned, built on the QuickLaunch data set and using Power BI, specifically the Q&A functionality. But this capability exists elsewhere. It exists in one form or another in all analytics platforms that are out there. There are off-the-shelf natural language query tools that can be used. There's open source. So a lot of options when you consider what we look at today and well beyond just Power BI. And a little bit for the remaining time on the future of what that's evolving into and what we believe is coming and what to expect for the future. Okay, and then of course we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So let's jump right into it. So first question is, what is natural query language? So NLQ has been around for a while, and the simple definition of this here is natural language query allows users to interact with computer systems using natural language like they would in a conversation. So pretty straightforward. Again, much like you would do with your phone if it's voice recognized capability that's very common today. Some examples of that in the context of our organizational setting, things like show me sales data for Q2 of 2023. Very simple phrase that keeps you from having to go to that dashboard or that report and filter through. Simply ask the question, what was our best-selling product for last year? And if you weave this into more predictive analytics or machine learning and AI that's built into your underlying data, you can even ask the same question about the future. What will our best-selling product be next year with a degree of accuracy that's depending on your data and the AI capability you've added as well. How many items do I have in stock? Might be a real practical question for a sales account manager or for a warehouse shop floor team member. A lot of applicable use cases here when we think about what does that mean for natural query language? But quite simply, it is how do we interact with that computer system so that natural language is used rather than having to use the typical point and click and filtering capability that you see with analytics today. Now, an important question I think to answer is, how does this natural language query capability compare to generative AI? Much of the headlines for some time now have been around AI specifically with the context of generative AI. Chat GPT hit the world by storm. It's now over 100 million users, Chat GPT, and growing. Bard or Copilot, other examples of that. So how does that compare? When we're talking about natural language query, are we talking about the same thing? Well, by definition, the main goal of generative AI is to generate new data that's built on old data, and training that data to be able to make the best use of it, but doing so in a way that really is creating new data at the same time. So a bit different than what we talk about with the typical use of natural language query. Also, it does incorporate some deep learning that relies on that trained data to synthesize, to create new content. So when you ask a question of ChatGPT, you'll typically see it's creating new content for all sorts of purposes. You may be wanting to create an agenda for your next team meeting. Well, you're creating new content based on all the content that's already out there. And the generative AI large language models are doing exactly that. That deep learning to be able to turn that into something that's synthesized and new content. Also generating new content in the form of images, music, art, and there's examples, it seems every week, there's new, really impressive ways that generative AI is doing exactly that. When we compare that to some of the options out there for natural language processing, and natural language processing is the broader category of turning that into a translated version so that you can query against it. Examples like Monkey Learn, Watson, IBM Watson's been around for a while. Google has an API for natural language query processing. Power BI, Q&A functionality has been around for a long time. The main goal here has been to enable computers to understand human language. So quite simply, the same as your pointing and click steps to go through an analytics query, or a text query for that matter, or searching through files in a repository. The main goal is to take those instructions, translate them so that the machine or computer, if you will be able to understand the type of query you're actually trying to make. On the back end, and we'll look at a little bit of an example here in a minute, that then gets translated into the appropriate type of query based on what that data set looks like, based on the nature of that data, and can do quite a bit of translating and create synonyms or redirect using specific jargon along the way. It's not creating new content. You can go and find that content on your own if you wanted to do so, but natural language processing can translate that into a query that the computer can understand, and go and respond by executing that query and giving you the results. It also includes the linguistic translation that focuses on the semantics of the query that's being made, the specific syntax that is extending now into multilingual, and the context of it. And we'll look at a couple of examples here in a minute, how sometimes that doesn't exactly give you the result that you may have expected. So that linguistic translation is important, but it's also important to make sure that we're training the data so that natural language processing happens in the appropriate way to meet the needs that we're trying to meet. And finally, extracting meaning and facilitating that communication between humans and machines. So by extracting that meaning, it facilitates that communication in a way that we become very used to in our day-to-day personal lives. The same can be done with the data that's within our J.D. Edwards environment and any of the auxiliary data sets that we've combined with that J.D. Edwards data. But extracting meaning from that query and going directly to our J.D. Edwards data to be able to make sense of that, turning that into a useful query. Okay, so why does natural language query matter? Well, first of all, it really does simplify access to data. If we think about even the most simple queries, we looked before at the query sales by quarter for 2023. Okay, well that is something that probably I know how to get to. I might even have a shortcut to go that goes to that dashboard. So I go to that dashboard, I then click on it and filter the right filter to give me exactly what I want. Maybe that's a pretty simple query. But turning that into a natural language version of that really simplifies it a step further for even the simplest of queries. If you extend that then and get more complicated queries, especially if you're not sure where to find that data, maybe sales data is really straightforward. Maybe sales data you look at every day, you know right where to go. But what if you see an anomaly in that and you want to go to something that's a little more detailed? Maybe we have a specific SKU that is suddenly not performing in the way it has historically, and I can see that in my sales numbers. But the ability to say, search for SKU 1234 and give me product detail. Search for SKU 1234 and give me any kind of quality information that we've seen, customer complaint information, production issue information for that product. That might be a much more time-consuming effort to get to that data. If you've structured your natural query capability in a manner that accesses all of that data, then it's very simple for the one-off type of ad hoc queries. It makes that data access very simplified. It also reduces the need for technical skills. It often can get more technical in nature when we think about more complex analytics. So when we look at advanced analytics capabilities that continue to increase through Power BI and other analytics tools, and the layer of cloud computing and data warehousing and lakehouses, it gets more and more complicated over time. So how do we simplify that? If we have a number of measures or attributes associated with our data, how do we simplify that so that any user without any knowledge of what those measures, what the construct of that data model, or even complicated, more composite data models, what that skill set needs to be, natural language query can really reduce or even eliminate the technical skills needed to be able to accomplish that. I think one of the most important things, because user adoption is something that we're always trying to figure out with any sort of analytics progression, whether that's the simplest in dashboarding or the most complicated in introducing advanced statistical analysis, data science models, machine learning, or artificial intelligence. All of that can really benefit the end user if we keep natural language in mind. It increases that user engagement in a way that they're really familiar with. You're not trying to understand what all is going into that machine learning model. You're not having to understand the more complex pieces of that. And that really increases that user engagement, makes it possible for users to engage in a way that's very familiar. And that can really make the difference when you have any sort of resistance or any kind of change, because it's just human nature to be unsettled at the very least when any change is happening. A familiar environment such as natural language query can really benefit that adoption curve. The byproduct of that is better decision making, better time to value. We talked about getting to the right data and making it that much easier. That, of course, increases your time to value. Not needing to understand any of the technical aspects of that data because we've already translated that into natural language. That also provides a big benefit to making sure we have a quicker time to value. But along with that time to value, that makes decision making much quicker and much easier. If we can ask the right kind of questions, drill into the subsequent questions that raises once we get those initial answers, that makes our decision making that much faster and that much more reliable. With trusted data, we can then make quick decisions and in the end have the analysis piece of that be the majority of the time spent rather than pulling the data, trying to understand the data. It really flips what I call the 80-20 rule. Typically, if you're pulling data and you spend 80% of your time just trying to get to the right data, 20% trying to then make good decisions on it, then you should be able to flip that. That 20% even becomes less. It's very quick to get to the right data. Therefore, you have the 80+% period of time to be able to make that much better of a decision. And that time to value makes that all the more important. Another big aspect, and this is true in analytics in general, having a very structured data model to be able to leverage, it improves your consistency. So natural language query can improve that consistency in a number of ways. We'll look at synonyms in a minute. One aspect of that is to simply have the right terms where people are asking questions that maybe have a multiple list of terms being used. For example, a common one is, I want to see sales. Somebody else might say, I want to see revenue. Somebody else might say, I want to see bookings. Well, having consistency across that can be improved by using natural language and driving consistency there. With natural language query capability, you can use that also to understand the way questions are being asked and drive consistency a step further. For example, maybe somebody else thinks of it as receipts. Give me receipts for Q1 of last year. Well, receipts hasn't been added to our model yet. And so we'll see, as a result of the NLQ engine, we'll see the answer to that question is difficult to accommodate because receipts is not one of the synonyms we've identified. We can monitor the wrong responses or the responses the questions we've not been able to answer and improve that, make it more consistent in the process. Okay, so at a very high level, natural language query is processing our natural language, and likely most of us on this call are English speakers, but that would apply to any other geography, any other language that is spoken. Also could be applied to other types of languages. You think about computer languages, if you wanted to get a very technical version of a natural language query, where you're literally trying to translate into a SQL statement, where you're translating from one type of SQL to another. So it's not just our natural linguistic understanding of language, it's also beyond that. But it is processing that natural language with voice recognition to take that output and then apply some semantic understanding. Now, there's a lot of capability that's underlying that's in that underlying engine that will give you a semantic understanding of it. We'll try to convert that, much like what you see with generative AI statements, because that is a core part of natural language processing that goes into generative AI. Same is true with natural language query. The semantic understanding then begins to form a base of what that statement should look like, and then an understanding of how to translate that for the underlying data set or sets that we're trying to query from. It will then take the semantic understanding of that and any synonyms or training of that data that we want to apply. It will then generate the query. Now, the semantic understanding and the definition of that initial natural language query might generate a different query depending on the data set we're pulling from. For example, if we're pulling from JD Edwards with a SQL backend, the query generation might look different than if it were a DB2 or an Oracle backend. So the query generation is going to look a little bit different. If we had unstructured data we're trying to query against, and that unstructured data might come in many forms, that query will naturally convert that into the data connection and the understanding of that query for the machine that we're trying to query against. So that query generation is the real power in converting that semantic understanding into the right query, the appropriate query for that. And then, of course, once that query is complete, the data retrieval from that, all part of the natural language engine that's converting that, translating it, understanding it, generating the right query, and then giving us the result of that data. The final step then is, what is the presentation of that data look like? And that's where that data will be sent to the destination, the presentation destination, whether it's Power BI or other analytics engines, or the API that you might use from an open source natural language query engine. It will then be presented in a way that that tool can consume and present in the right way. Okay, so just a basic example of this. So this is a couple of screenshots that are specific to Power BI Q&A, but it will be very similar with other tools. First, ask a question about your data. And we've already mentioned a few different examples of that, but show me sales by division for last quarter. Well, that query then is being interpreted. It's being understood by the natural language query engine. You see a couple of underlines here because those are keywords that have been translated as part of that semantic understanding to say, okay, I understand sales. I understand it because we've trained that data to know what sales means, to know what data field to go and find. Same is true for division. That's a cat code coming from our JD Edwards environment that we've now said that cat code or that business unit's field is best represented by division. We can create a synonym. It understands sales by division and understands the MCCCU definition as well as the extended price or whatever translation we have for that sales field. And then finally, the calendaring functionality, and you can train the data to do this as well. You can leverage existing calendar functionality that's part of your data model so that it will interpret last quarter in a way that is sensitive to the current time. So last quarter right now, it would naturally understand that to be Q3 of 2023. We can train that to be different if we want to. So the calendaring functionality there, the time sensitivity is all part of that natural language query engine. And then, of course, the output of that, it will understand and generate what it interprets as the best graphic outcome. We could change that. We could say, well, yeah, that's great, but show me as a pie chart. Simply add to the end as a pie chart, and it will interpret that. It will present the data that's retrieved in the way that you've specified. Lots of additional capability around what happens, but that's the step-by-step of what's actually happening when you're converting that and pushing it back to your JD Edwards data, whether that's directly through a direct query in your JD Edwards environment, through an ODS layer, through a full data model. Maybe that data is in a data set elsewhere, whether it's a cloud-based data warehouse or data lake, or even in a data set within Power BI or your analytics engine. Okay, in terms of natural language query use cases, and I did come across a couple of quotes a while back that I thought were relevant when we think about it. Like, why is it important to have this data? Edwards Deming, a famous statistician, said, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And in the world we're in today, where data is paramount, data is the new oil. A lot of quotes out there describing just how important it is to have data, to have a really good understanding of what that data means, to be able to have really efficient access and really trusted data in that. It drives a lot of the decision making across our organization. So the standard business intelligence approach that's been around for many years now, natural language query can help you better leverage that existing BI architecture, that existing BI process. And with a data strategy that's built on that, natural language query can drive that capability across your organization that really complements the existing tools you might have, even if those tools have been around for a long time. David mentioned legacy reporting. We may have tools that are now dated or obsolete. You can still leverage that. You can still leverage it in a way that drives better decision making as part of your BI approach. The broader data analytics in general, whether that's through BI tools and other advanced analytics tools or existing systems. You may have a variety of systems out there that you want to leverage. And maybe that's flowing through your JD Edwards environment. Could be EDI data, could be point of sale data, could be forecast demand data. Really leveraging that in new ways is where natural language query can help support that. But it also can really be an effective tool for other teams across the organization. Customer support is a good example of that. You may have a call center where the ability to ask natural language query against your JD Edwards customer data could be a huge win for those teams to go directly against that data and use the terms that they're most familiar with, because you've trained that data in a way that's very much the common understanding and jargon that customer support team would use. Virtual assistants continue to proliferate, and that you see that in a number of products out there now, not just the natural language query off-the-shelf types of programs, but virtual assistants are commonplace, whether that's chatbots that are used for online support or virtual assistants that are helping with the basic tasks on a day-to-day basis. And finally, also search engines. Search engines play a big part of what we do these days. And so tying that in and applying that to your JD Edwards data can be the equivalent of a search engine on top of your JD Edwards data, to be able to think and act in the same way you would if you're going out to search something on the internet using a typical search engine. Natural language query can operate in very much the same way. Also extends to other more very specific areas. IoT devices is a good area to consider, where you've got IoT devices that are driving anything from manufacturing to your point of sale. You could have a number of IoT devices that then become really useful data that you can apply natural language query that either augments or is a part of your JD Edwards data and gives you more real-time data, much easier access to something that would otherwise be much more complicated to query. Okay, so then if we think about some of the benefits, and I did include here another quote that I like: without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Same author here, Edward Stemming. It really is about the quantifiable and objective data that can supersede the instinctive and more individual approach to trying to make an opinion out of data. Natural language query can make it that much easier because you have much broader and quicker access to data. So it is a benefit in accessibility, and we talked about time to market already. It's also a benefit because of that time to market and the ease of use. It can really increase productivity. So if you have a data analyst who suddenly spends a lot less time trying to find and gather that information in whatever form, could be pulling that into Excel or some other tool, increased productivity through a much faster speed in getting to that data can be very significant. Of course, we already talked about that user engagement, enhancing user engagement, a big plus here. Data democratization, and there's business case studies on companies that have taken a very deliberate approach on data democratization. Natural language query can open that up in ways that are far more difficult elsewhere. It democratizes that data in a way that you can get to the data you want. You can get to data you didn't even know it existed through a natural language process, rather than having to filter through what can sometimes be hundreds or even thousands of different reports out there. That democratizes in a way that's hard to achieve in just about any other way. And of course, we already touched on this, but faster decision making is really a key. Okay, as I mentioned before, it doesn't mean there aren't challenges. There's definitely challenges and considerations in adopting a natural language query capability. The first is some ambiguity that comes along with that. And that's true just in a normal conversation. So here's an example. I saw a person on a hill with a telescope. Okay, well, is the telescope on the hill? Does the person have the telescope? So things like ambiguity in just our normal language would certainly still be the case when the semantic layer, that natural language translation happens. That would still be the case. You can still have the same type of ambiguity. It could be context. So maybe it translates that in a way that's precisely and grammatically accurate, but the context of it is still difficult to understand. An example would be, I need a lift. Well, you could translate that as, I need a ride share. You could translate that as, I need an elevator, because that lift is sometimes used for elevator. You could need a lift because you can't reach the cookie jar on the top shelf. Like, there's a lot of different contexts for that phrase, and understanding that context is sometimes a challenge for a natural language query engine. You do, of course, have variability, and we already touched on this before. Sales, revenue, bookings, receipts, you can go down the list. Net income, profit. Sometimes people use very different terms across the same organization to describe the same thing, and that variability has to be considered as well. Of course, data security and privacy with any sort of access to data is especially important. Who should have authorization to that? Who should, what kind of privacy considerations with GDPR and related privacy regulations, HIPAA laws? If we have access to data, we need to make sure that it's appropriate. We need to make sure that that complies with all of our business rules at the same time. And so that, of course, can be part of that data model, the underlying data that you're accessing. But it's an important consideration, because you may not think of everything as you're working through what natural language can unlock. And suddenly the democratization of all that data, you have people with the ability to find data they didn't even know existed. And it's just especially important then that the right type of security model, whether that's row level security or privacy based on certain requirements, that's all built into that data security and privacy plan. And sometimes there's additional training. While we can very quickly create a number of efficiencies with natural language query, it still can require some training and customization that may not be obvious at first. So if you think about the data within your organization, there could be some obscure terms out there. There could be some terms that have been used in the past, and they need to be considered as part of that training of your data, training of your natural language processing engine. So obscure terms, very technical jargon. If you have a very technical type of product or service in your organization, that may come into play where your natural language query engine simply won't understand some of those terms. And so the training of that data is especially important to make it fit with a natural language functionality. And of course, integration with existing systems, a really clear understanding of the completeness of the data that's being provided in a natural language query form. Making sure that if your underlying data is only one subsidiary, that's really clear, so that it's not misunderstood to be complete data. If you ask for sales by quarter and expect it to be from all subsidiaries, and it's only one subsidiary, that of course is going to be something to take into consideration. The completeness and exhaustive nature of what you're providing, or a clear understanding of what it doesn't include. Okay, I'm going to skip quickly through the tools and technologies out there so that we can have enough time to walk through a demo, as well as to also have time for Q&A. But I did want to mention one thing. David mentioned the QuickLaunch product, and we'll look at Power BI's capability around NLQ in a minute. That is really important to understand that data foundation. To build a natural language capability on top of that means that it's going to be best suited to have a very trusted data model or source of data. It doesn't have to be a QuickLaunch cube. It can certainly be many other forms of that data. but to have a really clear approach to that trusted data model is paramount. As anybody who's spent much time in the JD Edwards world, you can ask a question that makes sense, but there's so many implications to that, you may get a different answer. Going direct against JD Edwards, everything from decimal conversion, Julian dates to UDC codes might all come into play. So how do you account for that? How do you have an enterprise data warehouse or a model that you can use as that foundation? And probably just as important or even more important is to have a data-driven foundation that really persists throughout your organization. Now, you might be at the beginning of that journey, you might be very advanced and even an early adopter to new technologies. But having that foundation in some form or another, and this is just one example of what that could look like. First, what does that mean? Your data-driven strategy. What does that mean to the success of new technologies that you're adding, like natural language query, like AI? Do we have a data-driven strategy that's building that competency through a center of excellence, through a deliberate strategy that is designed to be embraced across the organization and understood and adopted across the organization? That data pipeline, as we looked on the previous chart, another really important element to the success of any natural language query adoption. That data becomes paramount. It's got to be trusted. It's got to be secure. And sometimes one thing that's easy to overlook is change management. Even though it's going to be a very familiar type of process, much like speaking to Alexa, speaking to Siri, it still is a change. And making sure to account for that, making sure to anticipate that, making sure to have the right kind of discussion, right kind of planning around that is really important to the long-term success. All of that really leads to the technology. The technology in this case almost becomes the easy part because the proliferation of natural language query capability just continues to grow. It's more and more built into applications from the start. And so the technology becomes the easy part. Having that strategy that gets us there is fundamentally important to the success of that technology. And then finally to how that becomes a competitive advantage for our organization. Okay, so with that, I did want to spend just a couple of minutes showing a demonstration. And again, this demonstration is geared around Power BI. It certainly doesn't have to be. So as you think about what that means for your organization, it's going to be similar in nature depending on the tools that you decide to adopt. So we see here just a typical dashboard built on our QuickLaunch engine. Shows a number of data points, different types of graphics. If I knew where I was going, I can point and click and get to that pretty quickly. But to help facilitate that, the visual tells me a story. I may want to go a step further. And these visuals, you can build a number of different iterations. This is a summary analysis. I might have a customer-centric analysis that's built part of this. Maybe it's a metric-based with all the filtering capability. But if I want to adopt or introduce natural language into this, the Q&A functionality of Power BI makes it very straightforward. It's a very easy thing to add, and we'll look at what that looks like in Power BI desktop in a minute. But the ability to have this Q&A capability where I'm simply typing sales by customer, and then it's rendering what it thinks is the best chart there. I could select more filtered criteria, and I'll do that in a minute. But you see also down on the bottom here, I've selected a series of questions that are the most common for use in this Q&A visual. The sales by customer is one of them, but it gets more and more detailed and granular. So sales by customer, by item branch, item description, because that's the way we've termed it. And I want to see it just for Costco. Well, that gives me a really easy way to go directly to a specific customer without having to filter through, without having to scroll through. I might want to add date components to this to see a year over year or quarter over quarter comparison. And once I start looking at this, I might have a specific SKU that I want to focus in on. You'll notice as we've described these, or as we typed in the natural language version of this, we've got those underlines that will indicate how that semantic understanding has occurred. So if I click on sales here, because it's underlined, I can see that it's giving me not only how it translated that, but also some other versions of that that might be valuable for me to understand. Maybe I'm looking at open orders, but when I said sales, I didn't consider that. And so I may want to refine that description a little bit, because the default synonym that we've applied is for revenue that's been realized. And you can see here a number of different descriptions that are something that the NLQ engine has determined might be appropriate as we look at the exact definition of what's happening here. Now, then we also see a different underline here on Costco. So Costco as the customer we selected. It may be that I'm looking at one version of that output because I've got a customer name that shows up in a number of different ways. You may have a parent customer in JD AdWords. You may have a ship to customer in JD AdWords. All that will give you the different versions of customer information. In this case, it's look for customer name as being Costco, but I might want to look at the parent for that. I might want to look at a customer number and name to get the right customer for that. All that is embedded, and even though we've got a default interpretation of that, it can understand well beyond that and understand there's other options that you might have actually been looking to achieve. Now, I said sales by customer, but I might also want bookings by customer, because that's the way I interpret that. So bookings by customer is going to show me the results for customer of sales and sales amounts. So I understand what's happening there, and that's because we've created a synonym for bookings that is the same as sales. Okay, so how does that happen behind the scenes? So in Power BI with the Q&A functionality, and let me just share this desktop version. So Power BI desktop is where most of that functionality is very easy to manipulate. And so this Q&A visual that is out of the box, part of Power BI desktop. You can see here the question box there with the ability to go in and change that. That allows me to look at this in a number of different ways. So starting with synonyms. So for this Q&A function, I can simply go into synonyms, see an entire list of all the data I may or may not want to include in that Q&A functionality. That's especially valuable if you have a number of columns in your data source that are similar. We already saw that with sales, with customer. So I may want to not include that in Q&A. In fact, for sales, let me just go down to that data source. And let's see the next one here. Okay, so I've got this sales field here that I have enabled for Q&A. But you can see here the synonyms that have been added: revenue, bookings, maybe booking singular rather than plural. I may want to also add something else in there because I saw in a failed response something that had been requested as receipts by quarter instead of revenue. So I may want to add that as another synonym. That synonym then will persist into the Power BI service, and that will now become one of the options when you type in the natural language version of that. A lot of other functionality here. We don't have time to go into all the detail. Reviewing questions that people have asked to fix them. That's much like that example with receipts versus revenue. You can teach your Q&A model. So teach your natural language interpretation of that over time using questions, using terms. Again, another standard out of the box type of functionality you would see with any NLQ engine. Or you can suggest those questions. Now, I added 4 to the beginning there. Maybe I have a handful of others. That's really valuable to give people just an instant understanding of, what are we trying to get to? I see this box. How should I phrase my question? And it gives you examples of that. Or with the most common questions, you can simply have that as an option to click on. Okay, so that's some of the high level quick overview of capability and just how easy it is to take your data model and include it into a Q&A capability. Again, same functionality you'll see with other tools. We just happen to be focusing on the functionality with Power BI. That would also just automatically, as part of the Power BI functionality, give you the option for a mobile version. So you see a similar output there on the phone, and that is the mobile capability within Power BI. Similar capabilities exist to one extent or another with other natural language query capability. Okay, so that's the quick overview of the demo, and a lot of advancements happening. I won't go through all of these in the interest of time, because I do want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A, but a lot of capability that's coming. So in short, the content we covered did cover a lot of ground. Hopefully you found that useful and helped at least get you thinking through some of the things to consider if you're going to go down that path of natural language query. So with that, thanks everyone. I know that's a lot of content in a short period of time. I'm absolutely happy to have any side conversations you want to pursue and talk about anything offline. But we do have a few minutes here for any questions that we've had come in. So David, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. That was very informative. I think you did a great job simplifying and providing business context for a pretty complex subject. So yeah, also thanks everybody for taking your time out of your day to join us today. We got some value out of this session. We did have a few questions come in here. The first one is, I have two different departments using the same data for different purposes. Can I train the data differently for each team?
Yeah, that's a great question. The underlying JD Edwards data may be used differently by different departments. Trying to think of a good example of that. Maybe the sales team will look at product data and the item master in a different way than the customer service team, or a different way than our manufacturing or quality team. And so that will lead to different types of questions, different use of the very same data. So the answer is yes. In Power BI, that's as simple as copying that Q&A functionality visual to another screen, to another dashboard that can be trained in a different way. Of course, it should also indicate the purpose of that, so that you don't have any misunderstanding. Sometimes, though, you can train the same data so that if the question comes in a different way from a different team, it'll be interpreted in the right way. So yes, absolutely, you can train that. That's a great question, but it's also, I think, highlights the importance of really understanding some of the challenges and considerations that need to go into that. That's just one of many where you really do want to make sure you know your audience as you train that data.
Okay, makes sense. Next question we have here is, we are considering adding ChatGPT functionality in our company. Would that blend with NLQ?
Yeah, great question. And I think with the continuing proliferation of ChatGPT types of functionality, you may even get emails every week, cold calls to try to add that functionality from AI companies that are popping up right and left. The answer to that is there is, like we looked at the beginning, there is a fair amount of overlap in the functionality with natural language query and ChatGPT. ChatGPT, by nature of what it's doing, is doing some natural language processing. The overall goal does become slightly different with ChatGPT versus natural language query, but they can certainly coexist and certainly overlap. And it wouldn't be surprising to have those different areas of focus blend more and more over time. In fact, we looked at the example with Power BI. That certainly will be the case in the roadmap ahead with Fabric and some of the evolution of what Microsoft is building in, and that will be a complement to the natural language query capability that's available in the Q&A functionality. I would expect the same to be true with other products out there. So coexist, yes. Eventually merge together. I would expect that to be the case as well.
Yeah, it'll certainly be interesting to see what Microsoft comes out with this new Fabric Copilot chat GPT like experience. So
yeah.
Okay. The last question I have here is we don't use Power BI. Are there other similar tools available for natural language query?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a long list and growing every day. Yeah, I wouldn't do it justice to try to go through even those that I'm aware of on this call, but happy to provide an exhaustive list, and especially one that might suit whatever your path is in your organization, whether it's Orca Analytics, Tableau, Click, because there are definitely plenty of options in any one of those.
Yeah, it certainly seems like most modern analytics applications today have some sort of NLQ feature they're introducing. So certainly a cool trend to follow and excited to see where it goes. But thanks again, Todd, for joining us today. And thank you everybody for coming. If you're interested in learning more about, enterprise JD Edwards analytics or Power BI concepts, please check out our events page on our website. And with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of their week, and we'll see you on the next session.